It's Qyjon the Icon here, and I'm sitting next to my latest art piece. I saw this art piece and I knew that it had to be an art piece of mine. I've been working on this for the last 4 days. I'm making this video because sometimes when I make things, I want to give the explanation because I'm the creator. I want to shed light and insight on what certain aspects of the art piece means and why I made it, right? That being said, I read this quote recently from Jordan Peterson, and it said that the icon will suffice. And that quote struck me because so many times in life you feel like you need to be that person, or you feel like you need to do that thing, or you feel like if you don't become this, then you've never done anything right. But the reality is that the symbolism of what you've done will suffice, right? That being said, you see this man's face right here? That is Tupac Shakur, and that is one of his most famous photos. And I have that photo there because, as the quote said, the icon will suffice. Meaning that you don't necessarily need the person to be here for what they were trying to accomplish, what they were trying to get the world to see, to live on, right? And as an artist, I have a lot of artifacts, right? And in my delusion, which we all must have if we're going to create, because if you don't have a delusion, then you'll never see anything further than what's in front of you. You must have something inside of your mind that says this can be different, and believing that this can be different is part of the delusion. So in my delusion as an artist with my artifacts, I feel like, hopefully when I die, or, when I die, because we all will, these things live on and they speak past what I was just trying to say. They speak bigger and wider than what I was trying to say. So when I create things like this, a chair with all the iconography from the 90s, from the 80s, speaking to the war on drugs, speaking to the hip hop era, when I create things like this, the hope is that the icon will suffice. The hope is that the symbolism of what I'm trying to say will suffice, and it will live on, and it will permeate to the level of keeping this from happening again. Because why I made this, and I like to put things in juxtaposition and put things together in a certain way to make you think, the reason that I do that is so that this doesn't happen again, right? All right, so let me move the art piece around. See, you can't see it, but I'm going to have the video playing beneath or to the side of me. And you can't really see it, but it's Michael Jordan, Chicago Police Department, some things symbolizing crime, some prison cells, all things of that nature. So you can't see it, obviously, but what I was trying to depict is the complexity of the black identity in the 90s and in the 80s. And what I want to jump off of the page, and what I hope jumps off of the page, is the thought, well, like I said, the complexity of being black in the 80s and 90s, but also like navigating that space while the war on drugs was happening. Because when things happen in society, not every segment of society understands. A lot of the times in America with politics, the sect that's being attacked, they know they're being attacked. But the middle class, upper middle class, the elite, they may not understand the actual impact of what's happening to that group of people. A prime example of this is when Clinton has a famous speech where he says he didn't know, right, that the prison industrial complex was going to do what it did to Black America, to Latin America, or the Hispanic population of America. He didn't know, right? And truth be told, him being a president, he may not have fully understood just how deprived the neighborhoods were, and just how lucrative drug dealing would be, and just how quick the police would react and stamp people and put people away in in the 90s for selling drugs, right? He may not have known the complexities, right? None of us can really grasp the magnitude of what we do, right? So what I'm trying to depict with this is how complex the black identity is and how aware we were of what the war on drugs was doing to us in our communities, right? So while we have Michael Jordan, who was the most recognizable face on the planet, a black man, and is still one of the most famous people of all time, while we have that image, in reality, we have more of this guy right here being locked away, right? We have more of that. That's more of our reality, right? So while in the 90s, Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson are at the pinnacle of existence, simultaneously, you have created laws to lock us up at the highest rates. So we'll move on. I have the shotgun there because you got to be ready, right? That's one aspect of living in the hood. One aspect of living in a neighborhood that's not, white picket fences, is you got to be ready. So as you sit, the gun always has to be next to you. You know what I mean? If you don't believe in, because I sit in a certain part of my house and I live in a certain neighborhood where, people have been shot right here in front of my doorstep. So I always had to be ready, and that's part of the black existence, or part of the existence of anybody living in a disenfranchised neighborhood. You always got to be ready, and that's what the shotgun right there represents, is always by me, right? A reality that many people have to understand. One of my favorite aspects is this Malcolm X picture. Love it. If you know, the most famous Malcolm X picture is him looking out the window with the gun, like I just spoke about, right? The gun's got to be next to you, right? If you live the black life, if you live the black existence, you understand that you'd rather be caught with it than without it, right? Home defense, whatever it is. So we'll move on. Once again, this is a 90s piece talking about the war on drugs, talking about the complexity of the black identity and throughout the 90s with all of that going on. So I have these three men on the back. Ice Cube and Dr. Dre were in NWA, one of the most influential rap groups of all time. We know that to be true. In the middle is Snoop Dogg, who is one of the most recognizable faces to this day on the planet. Love Snoop, love Dre, love Ice Cube. And if you know anything about Ice Cube's music, right, he was speaking to the complexity of the black image. If you know anything about Dr. Dre, right, he brought us some of the biggest cultural icons of all time, 50 Cent and Eminem. He brought those to us. So Dr. Dre is cardinal to the black image in the 90s, right? He pushed a certain narrative that got a lot of people locked up, but also was reflecting a reality, right? So these three people, these three figures, so to speak, these three entertainers, they speak a lot to that era of being black in America. They do, no matter which way you want to cut it. The Statue of Liberty here, with the black man getting arrested, with white America above it. Because while things were prosperous in the 90s at times, where things were prosperous in the 2000s at times, right? The reality for a lot of black Americans was that it was never prosperous, and that it was always punitive towards us for everything that we did, criminalizing our existence. And the Statue of Liberty being there is because within the midst of all that's going on with these three black figures in the background, right? America, freedom. But the reality is being locked up. The reality is while you celebrate, we get incarcerated, right? Over here, it's graffiti, which if you know anything about rap, hip hop, 90s, 80s, black culture, graffiti is something that's ours. Graffiti they've tried to gentrify it lately. It's become a respectable art form, but never forget how criminalized it was in the 80s and in the 90s. And that's why I have the graffiti behind or in the middle of Dr. Dre and Snoop. Above that, you see a woman. She's taking care of her child. And there's some money by the child's head, indicating that hood lifestyle, right? I'm taking care of my child, but I also got to hustle. Behind her is a very urban environment. It's graffiti on the walls, right? Of the streets of Brooklyn, or the streets of Chicago, or the streets of New York somewhere, right? That's what that represents, right? To show the duality of the existence of being black, living in an urban environment, right? You're watching your child, you're counting your money, you have another child looking towards you for guidance and everything. These are just the highlights. Also, you have to see the piece in real life to really take in what I'm saying. Okay, you see it. Okay, so right over here, one of my favorite parts is I have 3 hustlers right here, shirtless in front of a Ferrari, in front of a Porsche of some sort, and above it says, "What's the value of $1?" The reason that I have that there and the reason that I love that so much is because estimating the value of $1 has gotten a lot of people locked up. Estimating the value of money has gotten a lot of people into a lot of trouble. As a matter of fact, the question, what is the value of $1, is so integral to criminality that it deserves its own video, its own full analysis. But asking yourself the question, what is the value of $1? And then thinking about why crime happens at all levels, the lowest level to white collar crime, right? What is the value of $1, right? And if you think about the war on drugs, if you think about the black identity since America's inception, right? Our life and the value of money have always been tied together, right? Right. So like currently the war on drugs is ending, but it's not ending because the racism has stopped. It's ending because it no longer makes financial sense to lock up all these people. Now it makes more sense to legalize weed for the money, right? Now that we've already locked up enough people and disenfranchised enough people in America, financially speaking, the lawsuits, the criminal suits, all the things that are now going through on the financial end for law enforcement, it no longer makes sense, right? And culturally, we've moved past seeing marijuana as evil. Now, culturally speaking, we see it as something useful. So why not legalize it? Why not make money? Why not capitalize? So what is the value of $1? Everything you see in this art piece, horrific, not horrific, the question there is always, what is the incentive? And if you study crime, which I have spent a lot of time studying, you know that most crime is all financially based. Most crime is all financially based. We'll move on. Right here is Muhammad Ali next to Farrakhan speaking. I have Ali there because, once again, Ali is a great example of the duality of the black existence. On one hand, he was a champion, and on the other hand, he was vilified for not wanting to fight in the Vietnam War. I won't go on a Muhammad Ali rant. I'll just say, when it comes to being black, he perfectly exemplifies the duality or the double think that goes on in the black person's mind. Farrakhan speaks for himself. But if you are a person of the 90s, if you know anything about what was happening in the 90s, the Million Man March, Farrakhan had a lot to do with that. Farrakhan is an organizer. He's alive to this day and speaks for himself. I won't go through everything because, like I said, you have to see this for yourself. But some other highlights. Right here, what I did was I took a computer that was being used by a cop for analysis, and I put a picture of a cop, and then I put a picture of Tupac in the background, showing how everything Tupac was rapping about, how it happens, right? A visual representation of Tupac's genius, right? That's what that represents. And I guess we can move on to the front because this is already becoming a long video. Now this is where I snapped. This is where I went off. This is where I laid my head on my pillow and I was like, yo, you killed it. Like, to me, right? This dollar. With a Black Panther in the middle. Come on. Amazing. Like, truly, if you frame that, you know what I mean? Like, you could just frame this, you know what I mean? So, I won't even go into in-depth analysis of it. I'll let it speak for itself. But this is probably my favorite part of the whole entire art piece. And every time you make art, at least for me as an artist, every time I create something, there's a moment in the creation where I'm like, that's why that exists, to make you have that thought. So this dollar with a Black Panther in the middle with a gun on an art piece speaking to the war on drugs with shotguns on the side, right? All of that going together. That's why this art piece was created, to force you to have that thought, right? I just spoke to you for 5 minutes about what is the value of a dollar, right? And you know what I mean? To have a black man on a dollar with a shotgun, right? It's like, man, like what is the value of a dollar, right? What do we have to do to obtain resources in this world, right? What is it that we've had to go through, right? So there's that. We'll speak about this middle piece, the centerpiece. So there's a black man and he's holding back all these things. And I have DMX. I got some of DMX's old albums and I cut out the artwork and I got DMX in a portion because Darkman X, rest in peace, encapsulated the black image. If you look at his real life and his famous life, you see how he was showing the complexities of growing up in the hood and how traumatic that is and how that trauma manifests. So I have DMX there. Then on the other side, I have the physical element, which is the urban environment. It's a shattered window with bullet holes in it. That's what black men, not all, but a lot of black men go through. A lot of African Americans who are subjugated to living in those environments. That's what they're holding back. Like the trauma of living in that environment, the trauma of having to exist in that environment. Then at the bottom, there's somebody sitting on the stoop, right? Sitting on the porch in New York. There's a group of guys sitting there, and then it says police, right? That intersect the how they intersect, right? I'm trying to live in my neighborhood and living in this urban environment. I'm feeling traumatized. I'm sitting on the stoop and just trying to figure out my life, and I got them boys watching me, right? And then at the top, there's an American flag, but it's in African colors, black, green, and red. The reason that I have that is because, like I've been speaking about, there's a duality that exists. I'm not the first person to talk about this double mind that we must have, this dual consciousness. It was spoken about by W.E.D. Du Bois. Look that up, the double consciousness of black people. But the reason that I have that flag there is because we always have to balance, if you're conscious, right? You always have to balance being African and being American, right? And it's hard. A lot of us are forced to compromise our blackness, compromise our African consciousness to feel okay, right? Oh, that lighting is... Oh, there you go. So, I'll end the video there. I'm super proud of this art piece. I think that I did a wonderful job. Of course I think that. Why would I not think that, right? But yeah, I'm having an art show soon, hopefully. And you can come see this live and in person. So, other than that, it's been Qyjon the Icon. I appreciate it.